The dragon hatchlings disappeared for weeks until they were found on a mechanic's chest. Part 2. The crystal resonance chambers hummed their eternal song as Aldrich approached the nursery wing of the Commonwealth Dragon Conservation Facility. 23 years he had walked this corridor, and the sound still filled him with wonder. Each chamber contained a delicate ecosystem designed to nurture the rarest creatures in the known galaxy. Dragon hatchlings whose very existence represented hope for a species teetering on the edge of extinction. The morning feeding ritual was sacred to Aldrich. He had hand-selected the 7 hatchlings in his care from the most genetically diverse bloodlines available, each one representing decades of careful breeding programs and diplomatic negotiations with distant dragon clans. Thunder, the largest and most assertive, always demanded attention first. Whisper, delicate and thoughtful, preferred to observe before approaching. Storm carried the fierce independence of his mountain-dwelling ancestors, while Shimmer displayed the color-shifting abilities that marked her as potentially psychically gifted. The other 3, each equally precious, had their own personalities that Aldrich had come to know intimately. In a galaxy where dragon births occurred perhaps once every 50 years, these 7 represented an unprecedented success that had taken 2 centuries to achieve. Aldrich palmed the security scanner and waited for the multiple authentication protocols to complete. The nursery existed within the most secure facility in Commonwealth space, protected by energy shields that could withstand planetary bombardment, and staffed by the finest xenobiologists in 12 sectors. Nothing entered or left without his personal authorization. The heavy doors slid open with their familiar whisper, and Aldrich stepped into darkness. The silence hit him first. No gentle chirping of contentment, no rustling of small bodies shifting in their sleep, no soft breathing that had become the soundtrack of his mornings. The crystal chambers that should have glowed with warmth stood cold and empty, their bio-support systems cycling uselessly through the void. Aldrich's hands shook as he activated the emergency lighting. 7 pristine pods stretched before him, their transparent walls clean and undamaged, their life support systems reading normal on every display. Yet inside each one, where a dragon hatchling should have been curled in peaceful slumber, there was nothing but empty air. He stumbled to Thunder's pod first, pressing his palms against the crystal surface that should have been warm with life. The biomonitoring system showed no readings, no traces of recent occupation, as if the chamber had been empty for days. But that was impossible. Aldrich had checked on them personally just 18 hours ago, watching Whisper settle into her favorite sleeping position and listening to Storm's contented rumbling. A cold dread settled in his stomach as he moved from pod to pod, hoping against logic that somehow his eyes were deceiving him. Each chamber told the same story: clean, functional, and utterly vacant. 7 irreplaceable lives had simply vanished without leaving so much as a scale behind. Aldrich's emergency call brought Commander Vorth within minutes, followed by a stream of technicians, security specialists, and investigators who transformed the peaceful nursery into a chaos of scanning equipment and urgent voices. The commander's usually composed demeanor cracked when he saw the empty pods, his scaled features contorting with an expression Aldrich had never seen before. "Explain this," Forth demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. "I can't," Aldrich admitted, the words tasting like ashes. "I completed evening observations at 1900 hours standard time. All 7 younglings were healthy and active. The facility logs show no security breaches, no unauthorized access, no anomalous readings of any kind. The investigation that followed was the most intensive Aldrich had ever witnessed. Every molecule of air was analyzed, every surface examined for trace evidence, every energy signature mapped and cataloged. Temporal specialists arrived to detect signs of time manipulation. Psychic investigators attempted to sense residual consciousness patterns. Military intelligence officers questioned every person who had accessed the facility in the past month. The results were always the same. Nothing. No evidence of forced entry. No trace of transportation technology. No indication of where 7 young dragons had gone or how they had left. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist within the walls of the nursery. By the 3rd day, the search had expanded beyond the facility. Commonwealth vessels swept through nearby star systems, following every possible lead. Deep space monitoring stations analyzed traffic patterns for any ship that might have carried forbidden cargo. Diplomatic channels buzzed with carefully worded inquiries to species known for their interest in rare creatures. Aldrich barely slept during those first 72 hours, haunting the empty nursery like a ghost while specialists worked around him. The silence had become oppressive, a constant reminder of his failure. He had been entrusted with the most precious lives in the galaxy, and somehow, impossibly, he had lost them all. On the fourth morning, while re-examining Thunder's pod for what felt like the 1,000th time, Aldrich noticed something different. A faint shimmer in the air near the pod's base, visible only when he tilted his head at precisely the right angle under the growth crystal's light. He called for the technicians, but their instruments detected nothing unusual. Yet Aldrich's enhanced senses, developed through decades of working with sensitive dragon hatchlings, caught something his equipment missed. A whisper of displaced space, a suggestion that reality had been briefly folded and unfolded in this exact location. He had encountered similar phenomena only once before, during diplomatic negotiations with the enigmatic Voidwalkers, who claimed the ability to step between dimensions. Teleportation, he murmured, the word carrying implications that made his blood run cold. If someone had developed technology capable of bypassing the facility's shields and extracting the hatchlings directly from their pods, it suggested a level of scientific advancement that surpassed anything in Commonwealth space. More troubling was the question of motive. Dragon hatchlings required incredibly specific care to survive. Whoever had taken them either possessed intimate knowledge of dragon biology or had condemned 7 innocent lives to slow death. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A routine analysis of cosmic debris collected by the facility's external sensors revealed traces of crystallized atmosphere with a unique isotopic signature. The pattern matched emergency life support systems used in Commonwealth escape pods, but with subtle modifications that suggested recent activation. Within hours, long-range sensors had traced the signature's origin to a trajectory leading toward the Outer Rim territories. Someone had launched an escape pod from the facility's vicinity 3 days ago, following a vector that would take it to the sparsely populated frontier worlds where Commonwealth authority was weak and questions were rarely asked. Aldrich stood before Commander Vorth in the facility's main briefing room, surrounded by star charts and probability calculations that painted their next move in stark mathematical terms. The trail was thin, the chances of success minimal, but it was the only lead they had. "I want to follow the trail personally," Aldrich said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Vorth studied him with calculating eyes. "Elder Keeper, you understand that this could be a wild pursuit across half the galaxy. The trail grows colder with every hour. Those younglings are my responsibility," Aldrich replied, "if there's any chance they're still alive. I have to try." As his personal ship lifted off from the facility's landing bay 6 hours later, Aldrich carried with him emergency supplies for dragon care, a desperate hope, and the weight of knowing that 7 irreplaceable lives hung in the balance. Somewhere among the distant stars, Thunder, Whisper, Storm, Shimmer, and their 3 siblings were either thriving under impossible circumstances or slowly dying far from home. The hunt had begun. 3 weeks of following cold trails through the Outer Rim had left Aldrich exhausted and nearly hopeless. The escape pod's trajectory had led him through 7 different star systems, each one a dead end of false leads and administrative delays. Local authorities were either unhelpful or actively obstructive, viewing Commonwealth investigators as unwelcome interference in their affairs. The forest world of Kepler 438c had been his last realistic option, a barely colonized planet where the pod's debris trail finally went cold. Long-range scans showed scattered human settlements and vast stretches of untamed wilderness where anything could be hidden. If the hatchlings had survived the journey this far, this world represented their best chance of finding suitable shelter. Aldrich's ship touched down in a clearing 50 kilometers from the nearest settlement, its sensors detecting no signs of recent technological activity. The planet's atmosphere was breathable for most humanoid species, with a gravity just slightly below Commonwealth standard. Dense forests stretched in every direction, broken only by occasional meadows, and the silver threads of streams winding toward distant mountains. He spent the first day methodically scanning the crash, site where orbital debris had indicated the pod's final impact. The crater was barely visible now, already beginning to fill with new growth, but traces of Commonwealth technology were scattered through the surrounding trees. The pod had definitely come down here, but there was no sign of its occupants. On the second day, while expanding his search pattern, Aldrich caught the first hint that he wasn't alone on this world. Smoke rising from a valley 5 kilometers away, too consistent and controlled to be a natural fire. He approached carefully, using every stealth technique he had learned in decades of conservation work. Dragons were notoriously sensitive to unexpected visitors, and if the hatchlings had somehow survived, startling them could prove fatal. What he found defied every expectation he had built during his long journey. A small homestead nestled against a hillside, its buildings constructed from local stone and metal, salvaged from various sources. Solar collectors and atmospheric processors hummed quietly in the afternoon sun, maintaining the kind of self-sufficient operation that frontier settlers often built to avoid dependency on outside supply chains. But it was the sounds coming from behind the main building that made Aldrich's heart stop. Dragon song, not the distressed cries he had feared to find, but the contented harmonies that healthy hatchlings made when they felt safe and well-fed. Aldrich positioned himself in the tree line, where he could observe without being seen, and what he witnessed over the next several hours fundamentally challenged everything he thought he knew about dragon care. A human woman emerged from the main building, her dark hair tied back practically and her clothes bearing the stains of honest work. She carried a basket of what appeared to be freshly gathered fruits, calling out in a voice that carried genuine affection. Thunder, whisper, time for afternoon feeding. 7 small shapes bounded from various hiding spots around the homestead, their scales gleaming with health in the dappled sunlight. Aldrich recognized each one immediately despite the growth they had achieved in just 3 weeks. Thunder had grown nearly 20% larger, his movements more confident and coordinated. Whisper's delicate features had developed an alertness that spoke of mental stimulation and engagement. But it was their behavior that truly amazed him. Instead of the careful clinical interactions he had supervised at the facility, these hatchlings moved with the easy familiarity of a family. They played together, communicated through complex combinations of chirps and body language, and most remarkably showed genuine affection toward their human caretaker. The woman, who he would later learn was named Emma, had somehow achieved in 3 weeks what the Commonwealth's finest xenobiologists had failed to accomplish in decades. The hatchlings weren't just surviving under her care. They were thriving in ways that defied every theoretical model. Aldrich watched in fascination as Emma settled cross-legged in a sunny patch of grass, the basket of food at her side. The hatchlings arranged themselves around her in a rough circle, each one maintaining a comfortable distance that suggested established social dynamics. Emma didn't simply distribute food. She engaged each youngling individually, making soft sounds that they responded to with obvious understanding. When Storm grew impatient and tried to snatch food from the basket before his turn, Emma gently but firmly corrected him with a sound that made the aggressive hatchling settle back with what could only be described as sheepishness. She then made a series of different sounds to Storm, who responded with his own vocalizations. To Aldrich's astonishment, it appeared to be an actual conversation. The feeding continued with Emma ensuring each hatchling received portions appropriate to their individual needs. Shimmer, who had always been the smallest, was offered additional supplements that Emma had clearly prepared specifically for her. Thunder, whose rapid growth demanded more protein, received larger portions of what appeared to be synthesized nutrients. But beyond the physical care was something that made Aldrich's chest tighten with emotions he couldn't quite name. Emma treated each hatchling as an individual, responding to their unique personalities and needs with a patience and understanding that went far beyond mere animal husbandry. When Whisper approached hesitantly, clearly wanting extra attention, Emma spent several minutes stroking the hatchling's neck ridges and making soft, encouraging sounds. As the afternoon wore on, Aldrich observed a routine that spoke of weeks of careful establishment. The hatchlings helped Emma with various tasks around the homestead, their natural abilities integrated into daily life in ways that were both practical and enriching. Thunder's emerging fire breath was used to help with metalworking projects, while Shimmer's color-changing abilities made her an excellent scout for checking the perimeter. When one of the smaller hatchlings, a male Aldrich had named Frost for his distinctive pale blue scales, accidentally knocked over a delicate plant while playing, Emma's response revealed the depth of her understanding. Instead of scolding the youngling for the accident, She knelt down and spoke directly to his face in low, serious tones. I know you didn't mean to break it, Frost. But you need to remember how strong you are. Your family trusts you to be careful with things that can't be fixed. The youngling hung his head in genuine shame and made soft, apologetic sounds. Emma responded by gently stroking his neck ridges, a gesture that would calm even an adult dragon. It's okay. We all make mistakes while we're learning. But we need to think before we act, especially when we're growing as fast as you are. The exchange revealed several important facts that shook Aldrich's understanding to its core. Emma recognized that the younglings were growing rapidly and becoming stronger. She understood their intelligence and ability to grasp complex concepts. Most significantly, she spoke to them as individuals with personalities and feelings, not as specimens or research subjects. As evening approached, Aldrich watched Emma guide the hatchlings through what was clearly an established bedtime routine. Instead of isolated pods, she had created communal sleeping areas where the younglings could maintain the social bonds that were crucial to their psychological development. They settled down together in small groups, their soft breathing creating the harmonious rhythms that Aldrich remembered from the early days of the Commonwealth breeding program. Emma moved among them, checking on each one individually, offering gentle reassurance and physical comfort. The trust displayed by the hatchlings was absolute. They relaxed completely in her presence, something that had taken months to achieve even under controlled facility conditions. As the last light faded from the sky, Aldrich remained hidden in the tree line, his mind racing with implications. Everything the Commonwealth thought it knew about dragon care had been proven wrong by a single human woman working alone on a frontier world. The clinical, sterile environment of the facility hadn't been protecting the hatchlings. It had been stunting their development. More disturbing was the realization that the hatchlings' rescue from the facility might not have been theft at all, but an escape to find the kind of care they truly needed. The question that haunted Aldrich as he settled in for a sleepless night was whether he had come here to save the hatchlings or to destroy the first real home they had ever known. Tomorrow, he would have to reveal himself and face the consequences of what he had discovered. The easy part of his mission was over. Now came the truly difficult decision of what to do next. Aldrich emerged from the tree line just after dawn, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He had spent the sleepless night rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain his presence without immediately triggering defensive reactions from either Emma or the hatchlings. But as 7 small heads turned toward him in perfect unison, their eyes alert and wary, all his prepared words evaporated. Thunder stepped forward first, positioning himself between Aldrich and the others. The hatchling's posture was protective but not aggressive, suggesting recognition tempered with caution. A series of soft chirps passed between the younglings, too rapid and complex for Aldrich to follow, but clearly some form of communication about his presence. Emma appeared in the doorway of her workshop, wiping her hands on a cloth stained with what looked like mechanical lubricant. Her movements were calm and controlled, but Aldrich caught the slight tension in her shoulders that suggested readiness for quick action. "You're the Elder Keeper," she said without preamble. "Thunder described you to me. He said you were kind, but that the place where you kept them was cold and lonely." Aldrich felt his carefully constructed authority crumble at the simple statement. Not only could Emma communicate with the hatchlings in ways that surpassed Commonwealth understanding, but they had retained detailed memories of their time in the facility and shared them with her. The level of trust required for such intimate communication was beyond anything he had thought possible. "You understand them," he said, the words coming out more like a question than a statement, not in words exactly. Emma moved closer, and the hatchlings automatically shifted to maintain their protective formation while allowing her through. It's more like feelings and images combined with context from watching their behaviors. They're much more intelligent than your Commonwealth gives them credit for. Whisper approached cautiously, her distinctive silver markings catching the morning light. She extended her neck toward Aldrich and made a series of soft questioning sounds. Without hesitation, Emma translated. "She says you smell sad and worried. She remembers you bringing them food and checking on them during the dark times." Emma's voice carried no accusation, but Aldrich felt the weight of judgment nonetheless. "She also says you cared about them, even if you didn't know how to show it properly." The accuracy of the translation hit Aldrich like a physical blow. He had cared deeply for the hatchlings, but the facility's protocols had required maintaining professional distance. The sterile environment that was supposed to protect them had instead isolated them from the emotional connections they needed to truly thrive. "How did you learn to communicate with them?" Aldrich asked, settling slowly onto the ground to appear less threatening. The gesture wasn't lost on the hatchlings, who began to relax their defensive postures. Emma's expression softened as she remembered. "Necessity, mostly. When I found them 3 months ago, they were terrified and desperately homesick. Traditional veterinary care wasn't enough. I had to figure out what they needed emotionally as well as physically." She gestured toward the homestead around them. "I'm a mechanic by trade, used to fixing things that are broken. But these weren't broken machines. They were traumatized children who needed someone to understand their fear and help them feel safe again." Storm, apparently growing bored with the conversation, wandered over to a pile of scrap metal and began examining it with the focused intensity that Aldrich remembered from the facility. But instead of intervening to prevent potential damage, Emma simply watched with amused tolerance. "Storm likes to sort things by metal composition," she explained. "His fire breath is developing early, and he's naturally drawn to materials that will burn at different temperatures. Rather than stopping him, I started bringing him samples to analyze." Aldrich watched in fascination as Storm carefully separated the scrap into distinct piles, his small claws testing hardness and his emerging fire sense detecting internal structures invisible to normal sight. What had appeared to be random play was actually sophisticated learning behavior. "At the facility, we would have redirected that behavior," Aldrich admitted. "Too much risk of accidents or property damage." "And what did that teach him?" Emma asked gently. "That his natural curiosity was wrong? That his instincts were something to be suppressed rather than channeled?" The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the fundamental difference in their approaches. Aldrich had been trained to protect the hatchlings from potential harm, but Emma had instead taught them to protect themselves while exploring their capabilities. Shimmer approached Emma with what appeared to be a specific request, her scales shifting through a spectrum of colors that conveyed meaning Aldrich couldn't interpret. Emma listened attentively, then nodded seriously. "She wants to show you her garden," Emma translated. "She's been working on a project that she thinks you'll find interesting." They followed Shimmer to a small plot behind the main building, where carefully tended rows of vegetables grew in neat lines. But it was the arrangement that caught Aldrich's attention. The plants were organized not just by species but by color compatibility, creating living patterns that shifted as Shimmer moved among them, her scales reflecting and complementing the visual display. She discovered that her color-changing ability affects plant growth through light-frequency manipulation, Emma explained. "She's essentially learned to photosynthesize enhancement farming. I've never seen anything like it in any biological database." Aldrich knelt beside the garden, amazed by the innovation. The Commonwealth scientists theorized that chromatic dragons might develop such abilities, but we never had the opportunity to test it. The facility environment didn't allow for this kind of experimentation. "Because you were focused on keeping them alive instead of helping them live," Emma said, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "There's a difference." As the morning progressed, Aldrich observed interaction after interaction that challenged his understanding of dragon development. Frost and another hatchling named Ember had developed a sophisticated game that involved problem-solving and spatial reasoning. Whisper had appointed herself as the group's mediator, stepping in to resolve conflicts with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her physical age. But it was the relationship between Emma and Thunder that truly demonstrated the depth of what had been achieved here. The largest hatchling had clearly accepted Emma as his pack leader, but not through dominance or control. Instead, their bond was based on mutual respect and understanding that allowed Thunder to express his natural leadership instincts while accepting guidance when needed. "How did you know what they needed?" Aldrich asked during a quiet moment as they watched the hatchlings engage in complex social play. Emma was quiet for a long time before answering. "I listened to them. Really listened, not just to the sounds they made, but to what they were trying to tell me through their behavior." She paused, watching Whisper gently guide a younger hatchling through a difficult climbing exercise. "I think the bigger question is why the Commonwealth stopped listening." The accusation hit home because it was accurate. Somewhere in the process of creating the perfect controlled environment, The facility had lost sight of what the hatchlings actually needed. They had become so focused on preventing problems that they had prevented growth as well. "The Commonwealth will expect me to bring them back," Aldrich said quietly. "I know." Emma's voice carried resignation but no fear. "Thunder told me about the big place with lots of other keepers. He said it felt like being in a beautiful prison." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the 7 hatchlings who had consumed his thoughts for weeks continued their normal routine. They were healthy, happy, and developing in ways that exceeded every projection the Commonwealth scientists had made. Taking them back to the sterile environment of the facility would be more than a step backward. It would be a betrayal of everything they had become. What if there was another way? Aldrich asked finally. Emma turned to study his face, apparently reading something there that satisfied her. "What did you have in mind?" As Aldrich began to outline the possibility that had been forming in his mind since yesterday's observations, Thunder approached and settled beside them, his attention focused on the conversation. The hatchling's presence felt like both a blessing and a responsibility, a reminder that whatever decision they made would fundamentally shape the future of dragon-human relations. For the first time since discovering the empty pods, Aldrich allowed himself to hope that this crisis might actually become an opportunity for something far more important than anyone had imagined. The Commonwealth tracking beacon in Aldrich's ship had been silent for 3 days, a deliberate omission in his reports that was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Each missed communication window brought him closer to the moment when Commander Vorth would lose patience and dispatch a full search fleet to his last known coordinates. Emma worked in her garden with practiced efficiency, but Aldrich could see the tension in her movements. The hatchlings sensed it too, staying closer to the homestead than usual and engaging in the subtle territorial behaviors that suggested they were preparing to defend their territory. Thunder had positioned himself on the highest point of the property, his keen senses monitoring the sky for any sign of approaching vessels. "They know something's coming," Emma observed, following Aldrich's gaze toward the vigilant hatchling. "Dragons have an instinct for detecting threats to their family groups. They've been restless since yesterday." Aldrich's personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority message. Commander Vorth's scaled features appeared in the holographic display, his expression grim with barely contained frustration. "Elder Keeper, your last report was received 72 hours ago. Commonwealth search and rescue protocols require immediate response to this communication." There was no avoiding it any longer. Aldrich activated the response function, acutely aware that Emma and several of the hatchlings had moved closer to observe the conversation. "Commander, I have located the missing hatchlings. The situation is complex and requires careful handling. Explain the complexity. Are they alive and healthy?" Aldrich glanced at Thunder, who was watching the communication with obvious intelligence, clearly understanding that this conversation would determine his future. "They are alive, healthy, and thriving beyond all expectations. However, they are in the care of a human civilian who has achieved remarkable success in their development." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. When Vorth finally spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone struggling to maintain professional composure. "Elder Keeper, you will secure the hatchlings immediately and prepare them for transport. A recovery fleet is already en route to your position. Commander, with respect, I believe removing them from their current environment would be detrimental to their continued development. What has been achieved here represents a breakthrough in dragon care that could revolutionize our conservation efforts." Vorth's image flickered as the transmission quality degraded, suggesting that the Commonwealth fleet was indeed approaching the system. "Your personal opinions are noted, Elder Keeper. However, the hatchlings represent irreplaceable genetic resources that belong in Commonwealth custody. You have 6 hours to prepare them for extraction." The communication ended, leaving Aldrich staring at the blank display while Emma processed what she had witnessed. The hatchlings had clearly understood enough of the exchange to recognize a threat, their postures shifting to the defensive formations they had abandoned during the peaceful weeks of their recovery. 6 hours, Emma said quietly. "That's not much time to figure out our options." Storm approached with uncharacteristic caution, making soft questioning sounds that Emma translated without being asked. "He wants to know if they're going back to the cold place. He's asking if we can hide until the ships go away." Aldrich felt his heart break at the simple question. The hatchlings had found safety and happiness here, something that had eluded them in the Commonwealth's most advanced facility. Taking them back would be a betrayal of everything they had become, but defying direct orders would end his career and potentially brand him as a kidnapper of irreplaceable resources. There might be a third option, Emma said, her voice carrying the tone of someone thinking through a complex problem, but it would require you to trust me completely, and it would probably end your career with the Commonwealth. Before Aldrich could respond, Whisper approached and made a series of urgent chirps that brought all 7 hatchlings to immediate attention. Their heads turned skyward in unison, and Thunder let out a low warning call that made Emma's blood run cold. "Ships," she said unnecessarily, as the distant gleam of approaching vessels became visible against the afternoon sky. Emma's response was immediate and practiced. "Thunder, initiate dispersal protocol. Everyone to your designated hiding spots." The hatchlings scattered with practiced efficiency, disappearing into camouflaged hideouts that Aldrich hadn't even noticed during his observations. Within 30 seconds, the homestead appeared completely normal, showing no signs of the remarkable life it had harbored. "How long can they stay hidden?" Aldrich asked, impressed despite the gravity of the situation. "As long as necessary," Emma replied, but her expression suggested that this was a temporary solution at best. "The question is whether you're willing to help me implement a more permanent one." 3 Commonwealth vessels descended toward the homestead with military precision, their sensors undoubtedly detecting Aldrich's ship and analyzing the property for signs of dragon presence. Commander Vorth would be aboard the lead vessel, along with specialized extraction teams trained in handling traumatized or resistant creatures. "What do you need me to do?" Aldrich asked. Emma's smile was grim but determined. "I need you to convince your commander that what he's about to see represents the future of dragon conservation. Not a problem to be solved." The lead vessel touched down in the clearing where Aldrich had landed 3 days earlier, its hull bearing the official markings of Commonwealth authority. Armed security personnel emerged first, followed by technicians carrying specialized containment equipment designed for dragon transport. Commander Vorth strode across the field with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "Elder Keeper." Vorth's voice carried formal displeasure. "Report the status of the missing hatchlings. They are safe, healthy, and under the protection of someone who understands their needs better than we ever did," Aldrich replied, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was about to propose. Emma stepped forward before Vorth could respond, her posture calm and confident, despite facing the representative of the galaxy's most powerful authority. "Commander Vorth, I'm Emma Carter. I've been caring for the 7 hatchlings since their escape pod crashed on my property 3 months ago." Vorth's expression shifted through surprise, suspicion, and anger in rapid succession. "Human, you are in violation of Commonwealth alien protection statutes and subject to immediate arrest for unauthorized harboring of endangered species." "With respect, Commander, I haven't been harboring them. I've been raising them." Emma's voice carried quiet authority that made even the armed security personnel pause. "And before you decide to arrest me, perhaps you should see what 3 months of proper care has accomplished." She raised her hand and made a soft calling sound that carried clearly across the homestead. The response was immediate and spectacular. 7 young dragons emerged from concealment with coordinated grace, their scales gleaming with health, and their movements displaying confidence that had been completely absent during their time at the Commonwealth facility, but it was their behavior that truly captured everyone's attention. Instead of cowering or fleeing from the armed strangers, the hatchlings arranged themselves in a protective formation around Emma, their postures alert but not aggressive. Thunder stepped forward and made a complex series of sounds that Emma translated without hesitation. "Thunder says that you're welcome here as long as you come in peace, but that this is their home and they won't be taken from it without their consent." The silence that followed was profound. Commander Vorth stared at the display of intelligence and social organization that exceeded every theoretical model the Commonwealth had developed. The technicians' containment equipment suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but insulting to beings capable of such sophisticated communication. "Commander," Aldrich said quietly, "I believe we need to discuss a new approach to dragon conservation, one that recognizes their intelligence and right to choose their own future." As Whisper approached, the strangers with cautious curiosity and Storm demonstrated his metal sorting abilities for the fascinated technicians. It became clear that the simple mission to Retrieve missing hatchlings had evolved into something far more complex and potentially revolutionary. The choice was no longer between returning the hatchlings to the facility or leaving them with Emma. It was between maintaining the failed policies of the past or embracing a future that none of them had imagined possible. Commander Vorth stood in Emma's modest living room, his imposing frame making the space feel cramped, while the 7 hatchlings arranged themselves around the perimeter, like tiny senators observing a diplomatic summit. The formal negotiations had been ongoing for 6 hours, and the initial hostility had given way to grudging acknowledgement that the situation was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The Commonwealth Council will never accept a precedent where civilians can simply claim custody of endangered species, Vorth stated, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. These hatchlings represent genetic diversity that took centuries to achieve. Emma remained calm, her hands folded in her lap, while Thunder maintained a protective position beside her chair. Commander, with respect, the Commonwealth's approach nearly resulted in the loss of all 7 hatchlings. They didn't escape because they were stolen. They left because they were dying emotionally in your facility. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Aldrich had spent the day documenting the developmental advances the hatchlings had made under Emma's care, measurements that painted the Commonwealth's methods in an increasingly unfavorable light. Thunder had grown 30% larger than facility projections suggested possible. Whisper displayed cognitive abilities that exceeded adult dragon averages in several categories. All 7 showed social integration skills that had never been successfully developed in institutional settings. Perhaps, Aldrich interjected carefully, we should focus on what's best for the hatchlings rather than what's convenient for our respective institutions. Shimmer chose that moment to approach Commander Vorth with the confident curiosity that Emma had fostered in all her charges. The hatchling made a series of soft sounds while her scales shifted through a spectrum of colors that seemed to be specifically chosen for their calming effect. She's asking if you're the one who made the rules that kept them separated from each other, Emma translated, her voice neutral despite the loaded nature of the question. Vorth looked down at the small dragon with an expression that mixed surprise with something that might have been shame. The isolation protocols were designed to prevent the spread of disease and reduce psychological trauma from dominance conflicts. Storm snorted in what was unmistakably draconic laughter, earning amused chirps from his siblings. Emma's translation was gentle but pointed. Storm says that's the stupidest thing he's ever heard. Dragons are social creatures. Isolating them causes the trauma you were trying to prevent. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from Vorth's communicator. The holographic display activated to reveal Council Elder Thessarian, the ancient dragon whose authority in conservation matters was absolute throughout Commonwealth space. Her massive head filled the projection, silver scales gleaming with the wisdom of centuries. Commander Vorth, Elder Keeper Aldrich, I have been monitoring your communications. The situation you describe is unprecedented and requires immediate council attention. Emma rose respectfully as the 7 hatchlings suddenly became very still, their instincts recognizing the presence of one of their species' most revered elders. Thunder made a soft sound that seemed to be a greeting, and Elder Thessarian's enormous eyes shifted to focus on him with startling intensity. Young Thunder, the ancient dragon's voice carried, warmth that transformed her imposing presence into something almost grandmotherly. You have grown strong since last I saw you. The hatchling straightened with obvious pride and made a complex series of sounds that lasted nearly a minute. Elder Thessarian listened with complete attention, occasionally making encouraging noises that clearly urged him to continue. He is telling me about his new family, she said finally, her gaze shifting to Emma with unmistakable assessment. He speaks of learning to be useful, of having responsibilities that matter, of belonging to something larger than himself. Emma felt the weight of that ancient gaze and forced herself to remain calm. Elder Thessarian, I have tried to give them what they seem to need most: love, purpose, and the freedom to grow into who they're meant to become. Show me. The simple command carried absolute authority. Emma nodded and made a soft calling sound that brought all 7 hatchlings to immediate attention. What followed was a demonstration that left even the experienced Commander Vorth speechless. The hatchlings moved through a series of coordinated activities that showcased not just their individual abilities, but their capacity for teamwork and problem-solving. Storm and Ember worked together to solve a complex engineering puzzle that Emma had constructed from salvaged materials. Whisper mediated a mock dispute between two others, displaying diplomatic skills that would have impressed seasoned negotiators. Shimmer created a light display that conveyed emotional concepts through color and pattern. But it was the final demonstration that truly captured Elder Thessarian's attention. Emma presented the hatchlings with a completely new challenge, a mechanical device that required multiple types of dragon abilities working in precise coordination to operate. Without any prior instruction, the 7 younglings analyzed the problem, assigned roles based on their individual strengths, and successfully completed the task in less than 10 minutes. They have learned to think as one mind while remaining distinct individuals, Elder Thessarian observed, her ancient voice filled with wonder. This is the foundation skill that allowed our species to build civilizations spanning star systems. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the room understood they had witnessed something that would fundamentally change how dragons were understood and nurtured throughout the galaxy. Elder Thessarian, Emma said quietly, I believe these hatchlings are ready to begin teaching other dragons these same skills. They could be ambassadors for a new way of raising your young. Indeed. The ancient dragon's attention shifted to Commander Vorth and Aldrich. Commander, you will establish a new facility on this world, with this human as its primary director. Elder Keeper Aldrich will serve as liaison between the Commonwealth and the new program. Vorth's expression suggested he was struggling to process the magnitude of what was being proposed. Elder, the Council will require extensive justification for such a radical departure from established protocols. The Council will receive the justification they require, Elder Thessarian replied with finality that ended all discussion. What they will not receive is continued failure disguised as tradition. As the Elder Dragon's image faded, Thunder approached Emma and made a soft sound that needed no translation. It was pure contentment, the sound of a young being who had found exactly where he belonged. There will be challenges, Aldrich warned, his mind already racing through the political and logistical complications of implementing such a revolutionary change. Funding oversight, resistance from traditionalists who believe dragons should be managed rather than nurtured. Emma smiled as Whisper settled beside her feet and began the soft humming that indicated complete relaxation. Challenges we can handle. What we couldn't handle was watching them slowly die in a system that didn't understand what they needed to thrive. Commander. Vorth studied the scene before him with the expression of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered in the span of a single day. 7 young dragons who should have been traumatized refugees were instead confident, capable individuals ready to help shape the future of their species. I'll need detailed reports on everything you've learned about dragon development, he said finally, his voice carrying grudging respect. If we're going to convince the galaxy to change centuries of established practice, we'll need overwhelming evidence. As the evening shadows began to lengthen, the 3 adults found themselves planning something that none of them could have imagined that morning. The simple mission to recover missing hatchlings had evolved into the foundation for a new understanding of dragon-human cooperation that would reshape interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The negotiations were far from over, but the most important decision had already been made. The hatchlings would stay home. 6 months after the Commonwealth officially designated Emma's homestead as the galaxy's first integrated dragon development center, the transformation was remarkable. What had once been a simple frontier, settlement now bustled with activity as representatives from dozens of species arrived to study the revolutionary approaches to interspecies cooperation that had emerged from a mechanic's compassionate care of 7 lost hatchlings. Emma stood on the observation deck of the new research facility, watching Thunder lead a group of recently arrived hatchlings through their first integration exercises. At 9 months old, he had grown to the size of a small pony, his scales gleaming with the deep bronze that marked him as approaching adolescence. But it was his confidence and natural teaching ability that truly impressed the steady stream of xenobiologists and diplomats who visited the center. Integration Class 7 is showing remarkable progress, Aldrich reported, approaching with a datapad filled with the kind of measurements that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The new arrivals are achieving social cohesion milestones, 30% faster than our original projections. Emma smiled as she watched Whisper gently guide a shy newcomer through a confidence-building exercise. The delicate silver-scaled dragon had become the center's premier counselor, her empathetic abilities helping traumatized hatchlings overcome the fear and isolation that had once been considered inevitable aspects of dragon development. "They're teaching each other," Emma observed. "Thunder and the others have become living examples of what healthy dragon socialization looks like." The new arrivals instinctively understand that this is how they're supposed to live. The center now housed 23 hatchlings from various dragon clans throughout Commonwealth space, each one developing the kind of individual personality and social skills that had been accidentally suppressed by institutional care. But beyond the dragons themselves, the facility had become a catalyst for broader changes in how the galaxy approached interspecies relations. Storm emerged from the engineering workshop with his latest creation, a complex device that combined dragon fire-shaping abilities with human mechanical principles. At Emma's suggestion, he had been paired with a young human apprentice engineer, and their collaboration had produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. "The technological integration program is exceeding all expectations," Aldrich continued, consulting his datapad. "Storm and his human partner have submitted 3 patent applications this month, and their work is being studied by engineering departments throughout the Commonwealth." Emma nodded, but her attention was drawn to Shimmer, who was working in the agricultural section with a team of researchers from the Botanical Institute. The chromatic dragon's ability to enhance plant growth through precise light manipulation had revolutionized crop yields on 17 different worlds, turning marginal agricultural zones into productive farmland. "Each of them has found their calling," Emma said with quiet pride, "not because we assigned them roles, but because we gave them the freedom to discover their own interests and talents." The afternoon brought the weekly arrival of the diplomatic transport, carrying officials from species throughout the galaxy who wanted to observe the center's operations. Today's delegation included representatives from the isolationist Christek Collective, whose rigid social structure had previously made them immune to Commonwealth influence. Emma greeted the visitors personally, as had become her custom. The transformation from frontier mechanic to galactic diplomatic figure had been challenging, but the presence of the dragons made even the most formal negotiations feel manageable. Thunder positioned himself beside her during important meetings, his calm confidence helping to establish the respectful tone that had become the center's trademark. "Welcome to the Integrated Development Center," Emma said, addressing the Christek delegation with the easy authority she had developed through months of similar encounters. "I understand you're interested in our approaches to collective decision-making while maintaining individual autonomy." The lead Christek representative, a tall crystalline being whose faceted surface reflected the afternoon light, indicated agreement through the harmonic tones that served as their primary communication method. "Our society has struggled with balancing collective needs against individual expression. We have observed that your methods produce remarkable results." Emma gestured toward the common area where dragons and humans work together on various projects. "The key insight is that true cooperation requires individuals who are confident in their own abilities and secure in their place within the group. You can't have authentic unity without authentic individuality." Frost chose that moment to demonstrate the principle perfectly. The pale blue dragon had been working on a sculpture that incorporated elements from both human and dragon artistic traditions. But when another hatchling approached with suggestions, Frost listened carefully before politely explaining why his original vision was important to him. The interaction showcased exactly the kind of respectful disagreement that strengthened rather than threatened group cohesion. As the delegation observed various activities throughout the center, Emma reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The quiet solitude of her frontier existence had been replaced by constant activity and responsibility that affected policies throughout the galaxy. Yet somehow it felt like a natural evolution rather than a fundamental change. The evening brought her favorite time of day, when the formal programs ended and the center settled into the family rhythms that had made everything else possible. The 23 hatchlings gathered in the communal area for their traditional end-of-day sharing circle, where each one could discuss their experiences and receive support from their peers. Thunder had evolved into the group's natural leader, but Emma was proud to see that he led through inspiration and consensus rather than dominance. Whisper helped facilitate discussions when conflicts arose, while Storm brought his engineering perspective to solve practical problems that affected the community. Ember, who had been the most traumatized of the original 7, now served as the center's primary greeter for new arrivals. Her journey from frightened refugee to confident ambassador gave hope to every newly rescued hatchling who entered the program. Emma, Aldrich approached as the sharing circle concluded, and the hatchlings began settling into their evening routine. I've received communication from Elder Thessarian. The Commonwealth Council has formally adopted our integration protocols as the galaxy-wide standard for dragon conservation. Emma felt a deep satisfaction at the news, but it was tempered by awareness of how much work remained. That's wonderful, but implementation will be the real challenge. Changing institutional cultures takes time. True, Aldrich agreed, but we have something we didn't have before. We have proof that another way is possible, and we have teachers who can demonstrate it. As if summoned by their conversation, the original 7 approached together, their evening routine complete. They had grown so much in the past 9 months, not just physically but in confidence, capability, and understanding of their place in the wider galaxy. Thunder made a soft sound that Emma had learned to recognize as his request for the evening story, a tradition that had evolved from her early efforts to help traumatized hatchlings process their experiences. Tonight she chose to tell them about the day they had first arrived, frightened and alone, and how their courage in trusting her had changed everything. As she spoke, Emma was aware that this simple moment, a human woman sharing stories with dragons who had become her family, represented something that would have been impossible under the old systems. The hatchlings listened with the same rapt attention they had shown months earlier, but now their responses showed the depth of understanding that came from security and love. And that, Emma concluded, is how 7 lost babies helped 2 whole species learn to be better than they thought possible. The contented sighs and soft harmonies that followed filled the evening air with peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new visitors, and new opportunities to expand the revolution they had started. But tonight, in the quiet moments before sleep, Emma allowed herself to simply enjoy the profound satisfaction of seeing beings she loved thriving beyond anyone's wildest expectations. In the distance, the lights of arriving ships indicated that tomorrow's delegation would be the largest yet. Word of the center's success was spreading throughout the galaxy, inspiring other species to reconsider their own approaches to cooperation and development. But for now, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping dragons and the quiet sounds of a community at peace, Emma reflected on the simple truth that had started everything. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply caring enough to listen to what someone actually needs. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise, built on the foundation of 7 dragon hatchlings who had refused to accept that cold and lonely was the best they could hope for, and a mechanic who had been willing to love them enough to prove them right.